Jacksonville, the child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. Poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
This is The Week That Was on the 19th of October 2019 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Perhaps we should title our production The Week That Was Not. A number of items in the international sphere and in the national sphere are up in the air. The situation in Syria, with the border with Turkey, there's a so-called 5-day cooling off period, we'll call it. But however, the Kurd commanders said that they will withdraw from just part of that zone. And at the same time, President Erdogan of Turkey said they must withdraw from all sectors of it. And the general there, speaking about the Trump withdrawal, said it is catastrophic, it's a disaster, and that is echoed in the international community. Even old man McConnell, who is the leader of the Senate, a Republican, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post denouncing the withdrawal. We'll take a look at it and where this withdrawal of U.S. troops, I should say, that is what sparked it. And we had different numbers as to the number of U.S. troops in the area. There could be 2,000 or more of those. And from that 2,000, there are roughly in the Middle East area, add all the troops together, it's about 50,000 U.S. troops there, which is quite a few U.S. troops. And that sets up the problem with Wilsonian foreign policy named after the racist President Woodrow Wilson. And it is still being carried on. And I think we'll just go ahead and do this now. With DJ Trump during his campaign, he promised to, we had to take a break in just a second. He promised to withdraw U.S. troops from endless wars, he called those. Now, the endless wars, of course, are caused by the Wilsonian foreign policy, which is a colonial policy of expansionism. It is executed primarily in countries that are people of color. An example there, Libya, the murder of Colonel Gaddafi, and the disorganization that has plagued Libya, and the invasion of Iraq under the first President Bush and then G.W. Bush. But G.W.'s was done on a false pretenses, something called weapons of mass destruction. He even sent Colin Powell to the UN as a patsy. And we later learned that that particular speech that was written there, or I should say the presentation, was altered from its original form. In fact, they had not found weapons of mass destruction, but it was edited, and the PR moment was sent out to the American people and the world. That just shows how things can be distorted, particularly in the era that we were coming into at that time of social media, the internet, etc., the Twitter, Facebook, all those things there. And we didn't have in the 60s, when Lyndon Johnson was in the White House, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution there. And at the time, George Ball was commenting about it, and he said basically it was just some drunken sailors flying into the ocean. And basically that was it. It was a phony situation. But what it does show is events of that nature can mobilize the American people. And we have to answer why. Because first of all, the American people had, at that time in the 60s, had no idea where the Gulf of Tonkin was, and very little idea of where Vietnam was at the time. They knew it was somewhere in Asia. That was all they knew. And they were appealed to, the appeal there was on patriotism. So to be a patriotic, quote-unquote, American, you had to support the Vietnam War. But at the same time, LBJ was bringing in his Great Society program, which was a domestic program. And the Vietnam War was pulling apart funds that they needed. Now, what you had there was a continuation, or an excuse, we should say, for a continuation. We had the Great Patriotic War, World War II. Now, that was a deviation from Wilsonian foreign policy, but what came after it? NATO. Even the United Nations, old Wilson himself had a League of Nations there, but the League of Nations was a collection of nations, but with the exception of Ethiopia, pretty much you had a colonial program going on there. It did not fly. The UN came into being. But at that time, the pieces on the board were changing. You had the Soviet Union there, and there was some debate, particularly in the so-called Cold War with the Soviet Union. So where was that Cold War? It was to stop the maturity of the Soviet state, the USSR. And you have to understand that the USSR at the time had fought many wars, and they gave millions of lives to the cause of what's known as the Great Patriotic War. You had Britain in there, you had all the old colonial powers were in there, but without the Red Army, they would have disappeared off the face of the earth. Now, what the American government gave was support. In other words, they sent tanks on something called Lend-Lease. They sent tanks, etc., and the airplane factories were humming in places like Oakland, California, Los Angeles, and various other places. So the economy was booming. But at the same time, during the war years, America had an apartheid economy, an apartheid political system. African Americans had not been franchised in the 40s, and under Gibbon Hill, Harry Truman, coming out of Independence, Missouri, started to change things. He integrated the armed forces. It was a gradual situation, but it started. That was in 1948. And it moved forward. He had a civil rights bill. Things that Roosevelt had not accomplished, but you have to understand that the tenor of the nation at the time was an apartheid nation. It was a carryover from Woodrow Wilson, who literally resegregated Washington, D.C. and the basic federal enterprises there, like the post office and several others, to mandate that African Americans could not have most of the jobs that were desirable and would stay on menial jobs. But this went beyond Washington, D.C. We had situations where in places like Philadelphia, etc., that African Americans could not even be bus drivers. Period. So there was a lot of discrepancy going on there. So thus it would mirror the foreign policy after the war, and of course you had in the Cold War, there, and you had the McCarthy period that affected the body politic in the U.S. and still does. And through the 60s, thousands of people lost their jobs because of Gunner Joe McCarthy, until he was finally disgraced, driven out of his seat, and turned out to be a drug addict. Period. And that is part of the landscape that you still have. You still got the McCarthy types, and he was out in Wisconsin. You still got some of those people now. They've turned themselves into Trump supporters. So there's a history there. And on the left spectrum, yes, there have been progressives around. There was Wallace. But from, I guess you'd say, the practical thing, you had Harry Truman. Harry S. Truman, when Roosevelt died, he took over. He was not popular. He won an election that a progressive ran named Wallace. In that election, along with the Republican candidate, and the press had anointed the Republican candidate, Dewey, as the winner. But in fact, it was Harry S. Truman that boarded a train and steamed across America and organized the working class. Thus you had those years, and then came I Like Ike. That was in 1952. And in the 50s, I Like Ike stuck around until 1960, and we saw Senator Kennedy of Massachusetts elected president, John F. Kennedy. And then ushered in a very short period of progressivism, at least the smell of progressivism. And of course, at the same time, we had people marching across the South. Dr. King was marching, but it was not universal in the South. That forces, even within the African community, obviously we know the White Citizens Council and Ku Klux Klan opposed him and were murdering blacks and lynching, etc. The days of Emmett Till were extended. So we had that side of violence, but at the same time we had a little petty bourgeois middle class African Americans that opposed Dr. King, period, and opposed the civil rights movement. They were gradualists, sitting on the benches trying to keep whatever dollars their masters had given them. A lackey culture. And we still have some of that today, period around. This week we lost a freedom fighter, Elijah Cummings, the congressman type that represented the city of Baltimore. He was born in Baltimore, and he died in Baltimore. A great person. Rose from someone that a counselor said that he was too slow with his reading. He would never make his set target to be an attorney. He did, in fact, become an attorney. He became a congressperson, and he eventually chaired one of the most important committees in the House of Representatives. In the last few months, he was ill. In fact, he was riding around in a mobile chair, and evidently had oxygen. He died, of course, in Baltimore. He'd been moved to hospice care. But his legacy lives on. People make history, and history does not repeat itself, period. So thus we find ourselves now with the incomplete situation. Today, just before we made this, there was in the UK, we'll get to that situation, Brexit, and a loudmouth named Boris Johnson, the Trump of London. He'd been even the mayor of London. But his Brexit deal did not work out for Johnson. So Johnson was forced by law to send a letter to the EU, but he didn't sign it. The progressive forces in the UK are going to court to force Johnson to sign the letter. Now, once again, over 3 years have been wasted in the EU on a frivolous situation. Why did the EU leave the UK? Well, because first of all, they had a number of right-wingers there, and a lot of misinformation put out to the people. An American-style campaign, and in many places you start seeing these American-style campaigns. Well, what is the situation there? We'll go to it in a minute. Karl Rove, the master of the negative campaign. That's why you see on the internet all of these negative things, particularly in the conspiracy theory situation. And if you recall the rise of DJ Trump, he started out with the Central Park people that were, in fact, he was pushing a death penalty there. That is to excite the natives, so to speak. But those men were innocent. And then came the birther movement. On President Obama's supposed birth certificate, him not being born in the country. What was that? Another negative campaign to delegitimize the Obama administration. Well, when President Obama came out with the long form, those characters went back into the caves and the slime that they came out of and disappeared. That's the whole history of them, and you can look at that in terms of what's happening in Brexit now. These birds have destroyed the UK economy, and if they have a hard Brexit, in other words, they leave the EU, more disaster. And it did not have to happen. It was self-inflicted wound in the foot. And with a globalized economy, there is more wounds in the foot, shooting oneself in the foot by mobilizing people that have no idea at all what is going on out there. And this is not to be blamed on the working class. The Republican Party is a liberal party. Is a middle class party, and we've looked at polling here consistently on the Boston Red show. Where we highlight what is actually going on out here. So this does not operate in a vacuum. We have information that is disinformation that has become alternative facts, they call it. But one thing to remember, these birds are the masters of, like Jones out of Austin, Texas, do not take any type of collective responsibility for what they do. They say, oh, well, as happens. We try to keep profanity out of this program. But that is basically what happens. But history is made by people, and it is recorded. And these clowns will go down in history as clowns. We had a case out of Dane County, Wisconsin. That is the city of Madison. Jury there was in session. What had happened there, a place called Sandy Hook. We talked about that. And one of the leading conspiracy theorists that had got into the 9/11 thing, and one of the troopers, etc. But the problem with conspiracy theories, they have to carry this on. So this bird had been a professor in the Minnesota University system, in one of the far out places there, not the main campus, but philosophy of science. So thus he wrote in a prolific manner on various things. So he came to Sandy Hook. They wrote a book about Sandy Hook. What they basically said was that the whole Sandy Hook affair was a fictional affair. No one died there, period, at Sandy Hook. Well, you can make statements like that, but the problem is when you get into a defamation lawsuit, it has to be factual. So the person there, the professor, name was Fetzer. Jerry Pippin used to talk with him quite a bit there, but he got to be more loony as it went along. But the problem there is ego and various other things enter in there. These has-been operators had to keep the conspiracy going. So they told people, well, it didn't exist. The children really did not die in Sandy Hook. But the problem was when they went to the Dane County Court, they were placed under O.T. Leo, the Minnesota Farm Boys 3 strikes rule. In other words, the facts faced them. And there were several points to the facts. First of all, the father there had to prove that his son was born. Well, the birth certificate proved that. Again, we're back to President Obama's situation. Who certifies that? The state of Wisconsin. Period. And then it rocked on. We moved to the death certificate. Again, that is the corner there in. I said, excuse me, it's not the state of Wisconsin. That was in Sandy Hook. That would be in Connecticut, the state of Connecticut. Anyway, back to the death certificate certified by the coroner. So they proved a birth and a death of this child. That proof itself is factual. So what does this clown Fetzer say? Well, freedom of speech, First Amendment. The First Amendment does not protect liars and slime. So thus now, almost a $500,000 verdict against this character. The other party involved in that evidently settled, and he's stuck. Now, whatever assets he have, and they will have an asset hearing, will be forfeited. And you can bet out of that almost $1,000 there, as much as 20% of that. So we look at that. Well, how much is it there? 10%. What would be $100,000 plus of that would be even the cost of the lawsuit. So you have a very expensive lawsuit. Person is liable, and whatever assets they have under Wisconsin law, there's such things as pensions could be evaporated. 401ks, yeah, they'll go if there are any left around. And the only thing left would be the Fetzer homestead, his house or whatever. But if he has additional houses, all that goes. So although he will not die a pauper, it will be reduced. Even his pension check, that will parts of that will be, as they say, garnished. So what that means is when you make these statements, it's not a matter of, well, things just happen. No, when you go to court, more things happen, and they turn out to be negative impacts. It's sort of what we're trying to do here is bring this in line with Brexit. We tell people all the time these conspiracy things out there. People attend the groups and they believe this stuff. But now that whole Sandy Hook scheme has been, as they say, exposed for what it is, a lie. And some people will suffer the consequences, others will not. This slime will go back under their proverbial rock. Enough of that particular situation. But what we're trying to do here is bring out the whole fact of what happened in Brexit, all this waste of money, waste of resources, and that impact real people in a negative way. So on that note, we'll go to Uncle Carl Robe here, and we'll look at some polling. And even Hillary the Monster Clinton is back in the news again. Incidentally, today, the freedom fighter Alexander Ocasio-Cortez in Queens, Bernie was there with her. And this is something that progressives have to understand. That this is about a movement. It's not about an election in 2020 or 2024, as President Obama said, 2028. This is about building a movement, build a very strong movement, and that is what she is talking about. We'll have a special presentation on that particular item of how we build a movement. And we'll also get into the chiming of the monster, where the monster sees the Russian Federation in the background of everything. Nonetheless, Uncle Carl is writing here on the 17th of October in the Wall Street Journal, the Democrats' Big Chill. Tuesday night's debate moved at a frantic pace as 12 Democratic presidential wannabes, oh boy, stuffed as many words as they could into their 75 seconds for answers and 45 seconds for rebuttal. All of that talking, however, did nothing fundamental to alter the Democratic race. The opening question on impeachment reinforced the impression that Democrats obsessed with removing DJ Trump by a vote of Congress rather than a vote of the people. Until the Iowa caucuses, voters will hear more and more about congressional Democrats wanting to impeach DJ Trump. been about their presidential candidate's plan. The impeachment thing will crowd out the vision thing. Well, that's a problem right there. It will not crowd out the vision thing as far as Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are concerned. On one of the Tuesday surprises came when the moderator and anchor, Anderson Cooper, absorbed Joe Biden, his son Hunter, of wrongdoing when the younger Biden was brought onto the board of a Ukrainian company for no reason other than he was the vice president's son and got paid as much as $600,000 a year for it, and there's no figure there. We don't know what he got paid. Apparently unaware of something could be wrong and inappropriate without being criminal. Well, Uncle Carl admitted that. Could be inappropriate, could be wrong. Well, again, that is a value judgment there. Cooper's preemptively reassured the audience, I want to point out there's no evidence of wrongdoing, and that is actually a factual statement. He was reminded that Democrats have a debate of moderators who are on their team. Okay. Like earlier debates, the one that drew almost every Democratic candidate from it to the left as they often and endorsed fringe and deeply unpopular proposals, Kamala Harris did her part by declaring she would require the Department of Justice to approve any state law aimed at regulating abortion before a state court could implement it. So much for federalism. Moderates like Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota pushed back on the party's leftism, but the Democrats have handed Trump a vast store of general election ammunition with their proposal for free this and for free that. And this is the stigma here. It is free this, free that, and it's opposed to individuals will tell you that they work so hard for their money. Well, studies after studies in modern America 2019, most people do not work too hard for their quote-unquote money. They show up. They have what economists call defined jobs. They show up, they do a job, and go home. Now, people that work in coal mines, people that actually work, is a different situation. But this is not what it was targeted at. For even higher taxes, more centralized government. Well, DJ Trump has centralized the government as far as federalism more than anyone else. You only need to look to environmental laws in the state of California. Trump wants to federalize those. So you immediately see some contradictions here, and this is what the Democrats have to do more of, is speak to these contradictions of these so-called ammo. For job-crushing Green New Deal, for open borders, no one is advocating open borders, abolishing private health insurance. Thus, Elizabeth Warren was attacked from both flanks over refusal to admit that her health care plan is vague and costly. Well, she has not put her plan out yet. The attacks failed to boost the attackers. There has been a case throughout the debates, with one exception, when Senator Harris assaulted Biden in a June 27th debate over his opposition to forced busing 40 years ago. Even then, her bump in the polls was temporary after Strom and Dom voters figured out she and Biden more or less agreed on the issues. It's hard to point to any true memorable debate moment this year that boosted a candidate. Instead, candidates have gained traction by their campaigns between debates. Consider Elizabeth Warren. Her I Got a Plan for the Summer Offensive consolidated her support among the party's most liberal members at the expense of Bernie Sanders, Harris, and similarly Beto O'Rourke. May have stabilized their faltering campaigns with this emotional, if unconstitutional, unwise response to the mass murders in his hometown of El Paso, Texas, calling for a gun confiscation. Anyway, El Paso, Texas, what he said was to get the assault weapons off of the streets so we can get that where people will understand that. Now, there's $450,000 awarded there, so let us go on to some of this so-called ammo. Trump has awarded the next year's G7 summit world leaders to his own Miami area resort, the White House says. Well, this is by Fairholt and O'Connell, Jonathan O'Connell, David, in the Washington Post here. We just briefly talk about it. Trump awarded the 2020 Group of Seven Summit of world leaders to his private company, scheduling the summit for June at the Trump National Doral Miami Golf Course in Florida. Decision without precedent in American history. The president used his public office to direct a huge contract himself. And the resort sits among office parks near the Miami International Airport. And the sort of record here that's been put out, sharp decline in recent years. Net operating income fell 69%, 2015-2017. The Trump Organization representative testified last year. Now the G7 will draw hundreds of diplomats, journalists, and security personnel to the resort. The hotel is often less than 40% full. I suppose they'll have a full day. Mick Mulvaney, who announced the move, said a nationwide search conducted by the Trump administration led to conclusion. There's another story there that Trump put pressure out there. Doesn't look good. This is ammo for the Democrats, period. And we won't respond to if he left his business or he didn't leave his business. Back to Mulvaney. Mulvaney admitted what is politics. Get over it. Mulvaney twin admissions put the Trump at the center of the monument and Ukraine controversies. Period. This again is from the Washington Post, but this is widely reported here. First came a lengthy infomercial taunting President Trump's private resort in Florida as far away and the best site in the country to host the next Group of Seven. Then an admission Trump did in fact withhold aid to Ukraine because he wanted the government there to investigate Joe Biden. For 39 minutes Thursday, the acting chief of staff, Mulvaney, turned the press briefing room into sort of a confession chamber, openly admitting to several acts that could deepen the legal predicaments of DJ Trump is facing. Period. He abused his office for personal political gain. Mulvaney retorted to those charges, came in 3 words that now form the central theme of the administration's impeachment response. Get over it. Okay. By admitting that Trump personally intervened to award a multi-million-dollar summit to his own company and that the president had used taxpayers' dollars as a leverage to push the Ukrainian investigation. Now, this situation is a little bit different. It is not the appearance of wrongdoing. It is wrongdoing. There are statutes against this sort of thing. Period. But that strategy with regard to Ukraine came in a withering criticism after Mulvaney's appearance. He later tried to back it up. Too late then. He denied the quid pro quo he had previously defended as appropriate and normal. Well, if that be the case, Joe Biden and his son Hunter, normal and appropriate. Used to be just called influence peddling. First said the president blocked the aid because he was concerned about corruption in the Ukraine and a lack of European support for the country. Then he indicated that the president's political interest was also in play. Did Trump also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC survey? He said absolutely no question about that. And why we held the money up, and that's why we held the money up, referring to the hacked server there of Hillary to Clinton, admitting that Trump had linked to politics with this Ukrainian policy. I have news for everyone. Get over it. There is going to be a political influence in a foreign policy. No doubt about that. That's a Wilsonian racist foreign policy that's out there. And foreign policy is always political. Period. It cannot be isolated from the body politic. whatever administration's foreign policy is, and many administrations don't like to do foreign policy. They like to do domestic policy. Anyway, comments were widely derided in the West Wing. It launched an hour-long scramble to issue new statements, totally inexplicable. One lawmaker who, like others, anonymity is there. Trump had repeatedly claimed he had no quid pro with Zelensky. In his statement distancing himself from his earlier remarks, he blamed the media and echoed Trump's denial of quid pro quo. Well, they have, the mic was there. The words are there. We'll have to get the words and play them here. During the press briefing, he answered affirmatively when asked if there was quid pro quo and said, we do that all the time with foreign policy. Well, there's no doubt about that. There's horse trading in foreign policy. There's horse trading out there. And anyone so naive not to think so is an idiot. I think Mulvaney should rethink every stepping in front of a microphone. That's Chris Whipple, author of The Gatekeepers, a book about the previous White House chiefs of staff. So in other words, the information is out there now, and it's been retweeted thousands of times. Went into Olympia to praise the property, amenities during the briefing, citing a 900 acres free golf course and perfect common areas. He dismissed arguments that financial struggle result. Well, maybe 900 acres. I didn't know it was that large. I'll have to ask Haley about that and see what situation is. She lives down that area, so she'll know it. Hopefully she'll put it in one of her broadcasts. We'll have to look and we'll have to see. Now let's get to a little bit of polling here. So we can kind of... This is from Real Clear Channel here. And this is a Politico poll out here. And it's a little early. We don't have the Iowa caucus, obviously, until February. But if we look at some of this, we'll look back here. Let's get some of the weak stuff here. And there's an accompanying Reuters article there. They have Joe Biden at 31, Liz Warren at 21, and Bernie Sanders at 18. Buttigieg, the little fellow from South Bend, at 6. Kamala Harris at 7. She's ahead of him. Beto at 2. Yang at 3. Senator Klobuchar and Booker at 2. I wouldn't put much into that one. And earlier we reported the Emerson polls here out of Boston. They have a tie 23-23 with Biden. 13 with Sanders with Bernie, and they have Buttigieg high at 16, Harris at 2, and so forth and so on. And this is Iowa, and the matchups there, they actually have Trump ahead by 2 points. We look at that, interesting. Over Biden, 2 points over Warren, and Bernie's ahead of him by 2 points. Incidentally, all of these polls, virtually all of them, when we have head-to-head matchups, with Bernie and DJ Trump, Bernie is the leader there. That tells you a little something of what's going on here. And the YouTube matchup, was on Wednesday. Warren's up by 4, 29-25 over Joe, and Bernie is at 13. Buttigieg is at 7, and Harris is at 5, and Senator Booker at 1, and Senator Klobuchar at 2. I wouldn't pay much attention to that. And we reported the Mason-Dixon poll out of the state of Kentucky, or the Commonwealth of Kentucky, actually. Blevin and Bashir at 46-46, but that's in the margin of error. We get approval ratings here also. Morning Consult, 40% for DJ Trump, 57 disapproval rating. Generic ballot there, Democrats up by 9, 49-36. That only plays later in the ball game. And that's the Morning Consult and YouGov Economist. It's YouGov, the online poll. Democrats up by 10. And we want to give Maine here. Basically, in Maine, it shows that Biden is leading at DJ Trump by 12, Warren by 10, Bernie by 10, Buttigieg by 9, and so forth and so on. And somewhere here we have the Gallup of President's approval. Now, this is a Cadillac of polls. Gallup has him at 39. We'll try to get the Gallup poll on the Monday morning quarterback. I know, I didn't notice this. It's Monday here. All our old buddies at the Boston Herald, used to be the Boston Herald American. This is in New Hampshire. Warren by 1, Warren at 25, Biden at 24, and Bernie Sanders at 22. Very good poll by the Boston Herald. It used to be Boston Herald American. Buttigieg at 9, Senator Harris at 4, Senator Klobuchar at 2, Senator Booker at 2, and the North Carolina Democratic presidential candidate primary, Biden is up by 10. That's East Carolina University. Didn't hear much from them. And Bernie at 7, Warren at 17, Bernie at 19 in North Carolina. Been doing a lot of work down there. Klobuchar is doing pretty good down there. Amy Klobuchar at 3, and O'Rourke at 4. So they've been doing a lot of good work in Carolina. And the matchups here, Biden is ahead by 4 over DJ Trump. Warren is behind by 1 point. And again, Bernie is ahead by 1 point in North Carolina with DJ Trump. South Bend is Trump's over him by 2. He's over by 2 with Harris. So these are some of the, this is East Carolina University. And Cognac poll here. DJ Trump, 41 is his approval rating there. And disapproval at 50. So that rounds that out. Let's move along here a little bit. I think we have somewhere here we have the packet. Now, sorry about this. This is our economic packet. And incidentally, we will have the Numbers Man program, a Numbers Man show, as they call it. That will be up this weekend. In fact, we'll be working on that shortly here, sometime shortly. And we've covered Brexit. I think now we'll go to the infamous Hillary Clinton and the various machinations she's come up with here. Incidentally, she was interviewed on a podcast by the manager of the Clinton campaign. The manager of Barack Obama's campaign said she says the Russian Federation is grooming Cassie Galbert to be a third-party candidate, according to Hillary Clinton. Tulsi Gabbard fired back on Twitter, calling Hillary Clinton, the presidential nominee, the queen of warmongers. Well, she's not known as the monster for nothing. Anyway, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said on a podcast interview that Russia sees a Democratic representative, Tulsi Gabbard, she is from Hawaii, as a potential third-party candidate who could spoil the race for the Democrats. Well. Clinton, the nominee, made the comments on a podcast by David Fluff, who managed former President Obama's 2008 campaign. Clinton said that one tool Russia could use to interfere in 2020 and aid DJ Trump is boosting a third-party spoiler, while Clinton didn't mention Tulsi Gabbard by name, but she made clear reference to the Hawaii Congress person in Hawaii. She also mentioned Jill Stein. She didn't forget Jill Stein. We voted for Jill Stein. The Green nominee is another American politician favored by Russia. I'm not making any prediction, but I think they've got their eyes on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary, and they're grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She said in an interview with David Fluff's Campaign HQ broadcast, she favors the Russians. She has a bunch of sites and blots and other ways of supporting her so far. That's assuming Jill will give it up because she's also a Russian asset. Boy, oh boy. And spokesman there, Nick Merrill, Tulsi Gabbard there. Thank you, Hillary Clinton. Have tweeted, "You're the queen of warmongers, the embodiment of corruption, and the personification of rot that has sickened the Democratic Party for so long, and have finally come out from behind the curtain. For the day I announced my candidacy, there has been a concerted campaign to destroy my reputation." But this is not the only reputation these people are trying to destroy. They're trying to destroy Bernie Sanders, Liz Warren. But with the media, we wonder who is behind it and why. Now we know it was always Emma Young, the ad lady out of Chicago, has said basically the same things about these characters. Through your proxies and powerful allies in corporate media and the war machines, afraid of the threat that I pose. Now it's clear this primary is between you and me. Gabbard continued. Don't cowardly hide behind your proxies. Join the race directly. I was frequently mentioned in Russia propaganda and media, including by RT, that is a Russian television site. Close. And now she's trying to connect it with the Syrian government. Has struggled for traction, polling and fundraising in Democratic primary. Most polls show her in the single digits. Well, a lot of people are in the single digits. She raised $3 million and has participated in 3 Democratic debates and maintains the president as a favorite for some liberal activists. This thing says here. So that is the contribution of Hillary Clinton. And David Fluff put her out here for the world to see. And I guess now we saw her. I was trying to get some audio for that. Hopefully we'll get some audio here and we'll be able to bring it to you. It's also incidentally made the Wall Street Journal period here. Here's the Reuters explanation of Joe Biden and their poll there we recently, and then we'll wind it down here. We're running a little bit over. Summary of their poll here. Anyway, expands edge in a Democratic nomination race. This is Reuters ISOS poll. Former vice president expanded his lead more than a dozen over other candidates. That's what they're trying to tell you. This poll, incidentally, was taken 17th to 18th of October, found that 21% of Democrats and independents said they vote for Biden in statewide nominating contests that begin next year, up 3% from a similar poll in September. Democrats in the House of Representatives are holding hearings to investigate D.J. Trump. The House could vote to impeach D.J. Trump later this year. In fact, the old man McConnell has said that he'd like to get it up and going in the Senate by Thanksgiving, Turkey Day, as someone said. According to the poll, 60% of Democrats and independents say they would support Bernie Sanders of Vermont, while 15% would support Liz Warren. And a little fellow from South Bend received 5% of support percent of support in the poll, whereas Senator Harris and Beto O'Rourke at 3%. In other words, they're basically in the same ballpark as far as this. With less than 4 months to go before Iowa holds its first nominating contest, the race for Democratic nomination remains wide open, with 1 in 5 saying they remain undecided. That's 20% there. It's probably more than that. Most candidates, including Little Pete, are still relatively unknown to a majority of Americans. Only 1 in 10 say they watched the debate. The debates were not very well watched. And the reason for that, we had baseball, had other things to do. The poll was conducted online in English, I guess not Espanol, throughout the U.S. It gathered responses from 1,116 adults, including 703 Democrats and independents. Measurement is about 4% then. So that is the Reuters poll. Incidentally, the Game 5 with the American League Championship is held. The Yankees won last night. And so thus we have a Game 5 set up later today in Houston, Texas. And it's do or die for the Yankees. They have to win 4 straight games. They could tie it up 3-3, and then they go to a Game 7. while the Nationals of Washington, D.C. await them. That's an interesting situation with the Nationals, how they went there. At one time, there were the Washington Senators in D.C. They later moved to Minnesota. And the Homestead team of the African League were in D.C. They were the last one there. And then as other teams have popped up in D.C. and popped out. The team that's there now, the Nationals, that came from the Expos in Montreal, Canada, to D.C. So these franchises move around. But the Nationals, this is their first time ever visit to the World Series as the Nationals. And the Expos, let me see, the Expos, I believe they did get to a serious situation. They were in the National League. So we look forward to that. Haven't looked at the Vegas lines. We'll have that for the Monday morning. The quarterback, because we'll start to know who would be there. Well, if they would say that if the Nationals and Yankees in the series, I'd give a slight edge to the Nationals. First of all, they're arrested, the arms are arrested. Now, with the Astros of Houston in the race there, it'll be an interesting situation because they both have good pitching. Nationals have some pitchers, and they have hellacious relief corps there, including what's his name? That has his cap on sideways there. He's in his 40s, and we'll have to get him later. Anyway, we'll have the odds. We'll even have the odds from the Real Clear. They have betting odds from various places there that they are they bring in. I don't know if we'll be able to look at the odds quickly here and not. It will depend, obviously, if we get on which page we are getting what on. This is the latest polls. We won't have it on the latest polls. But anyway, we'll get that. The last time I looked, Elizabeth Warren was leading. And we'll have that information. Nonetheless, we'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback on Monday morning. Again, to sum this day up, Brexit's still in limbo. Old Boris Johnson was forced to send a letter. That's one reason we're late today. To the EU. He didn't sign it, but they want an extension. And they're also going to court in the UK. That's where the situation is there. The so-called ceasefire in Syria that involves the Lebanese government that involves the Kurds, Turkey, etc., partially holding. The big argument on now is how much space they have. The Turkish government like to set up basically a 20-mile, what's that, about 23, 24 kilometer safe zone. And we'll see how that turns out there. And on the other side, you have the Syrian army. They've moved in. And you have Russian Federation people there. And various others have moved in. A more permanent situation. The free Syrian people have been forced to throw their, as they say, hats in the ring with the Syrian army. Things change in those type of warfare. It continues to change. We'll see where it turns out. Well, one of the things that is turning out here, the Wilsonian foreign policy is disappearing. One of the positive things from DJ Trump. Of course, we haven't seen any movement on the Korean Peninsula. Had he pulled that off, he'd have got the Nobel Peace Prize instead of the president of Mozambique. Anyway, this will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback. And we'll have the Numbers Man show. That's our macroeconomic presentation here. And we're trying to get an open source report out also. Good day.